ELI 5, how did tip culture start in the US? Why did restaurants start paying so low? This is kind of two different questions. Other people are talking about when it started. When did restaurants start paying so low is complicated. Some restaurants always paid very poorly. Not all of them, though. The reason you can hear about it so much today is revealed if you look at a graph comparing US cost of living versus wages. We've barely raised wages for service workers over the last 30 years, but the costs of living have steadily increased. So a better way to put it is that even with tips, a lot of restaurants have been paying 1980s wages since the 1980s. That worked in the 1980s. The 1990s were relatively good too. Things got a little rough in the 2000s, slightly recovered in the 2010s, but over the 2020s we've seen them get progressively worse. Restaurants would be paying enough if rent and groceries hadn't nearly quadrupled in price since the wages were considered enough. But the restaurants are in a spot, too, they have to pay that higher rent and grocery cost as well, and they worry if they raise prices to compensate then their middle class and upper class customers will stop coming. So they've compensated by doing everything they can to not raise wages, but it's starting to impact their service and the availability of workers. And it's not universal. In my city, any thread about tip wages unavoidably includes commentary from people working at some of the higher-end restaurants in town. These restaurants have expensive food, as in, $60 per plate and up, and promise exceptional service. So they pay their waiters very well and have tips. Naturally, those people feel like, I have tip wages too, and try to argue the system is great, because their tips come from tables that might spend $4,000 in one sitting. That would be great, except in the whole city those restaurants represent maybe 100 jobs, and not every restaurant is that fancy. We don't have enough rich people to support a whole city of that. But long story short, we used to ignore the ones that paid badly for reasons like racism because it was uncomfortable to bring up those topics. But over time even the restaurants who started out trying to be fair have seemed to be paying less. The true problem is that the cost of being alive is going up, but the amount people get paid to work for an hour is not. Tip wages can be fair. But like all things that can be abused, when they are abused they are not.